Good morning, everyone, and apologies for the delay. We just had some technical issues this morning, but welcome to the Government Speaker Series. And my name is Sassoon Gregorian, and I lead Government Affairs for APAC for Salesforce. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I am on, the Watamatagal clan of the Youre Nation, and I pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Now, today we've got a very exciting discussion. We'll be talking about addressing the digital skills gap. And joining our employees today are also our Salesforce partners, and we welcome them as well. Last month at Dreamforce, Salesforce's annual event, we released global research from the IDC. According to the IDC model, in Australia, this year's estimated business revenue is expected to be $7 billion, with nearly 85,000 jobs tied to the use of Salesforce. The partner ecosystem is expected to generate $5 billion in revenue in 2021. However, in order to fill these jobs, we must address the digital skills gap. By 2025, Australia will need 156,000 new technology workers, with 87% of jobs now requiring digital skills. And in fact, this was verified in a survey we did with YouGov early this year on the need to address this gap. There is no better person equipped to address these issues than today's guest, Adam Boyton, Australia's inaugural National Skills Commissioner. And we welcome Adam to the speaker series today. Adam became the National Skills Commissioner in July 2020 when the National Skills Commission was formed and was focused on three main long-term outcomes to address the skills shortages in Australia. Adam was the Chief Economist at the Business Council of Australia, which Salesforce is a proud member of, an Australian Chief Economist at Deutsche Bank prior to his current appointment. He was also a member of the New South Wales Skills Board from 2013 to 2019. If you have a question, please submit it via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our CEO, Pip Marlow, who will be moderating this fascinating session with Adam. Over to you, Pip.
Thanks, Sassoon, and thanks for not declaring at the start that the technical problems were me. It's always great, I say, to work for one of the greatest technology companies in the world and then have a problem joining a Zoom meeting. It is a pleasure to be here today with all of you. And Adam, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you virtually today. So welcome to the webinar. I thought it might be just really great to start, if it's all right with you, to hand over to you just to share a little bit about your role as the inaugural National Skills Commissioner. Tell me a little bit about, the role, the remit, and how you got here.
Sure. Thank you, Pip, and thank you, Sassoon, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here this morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think one of the things, I joined the public service as a graduate in the mid-1990s, and I left after a few years, and I've recently come back after 20 years in the private sector. I think it's really important that the public and private sectors have more of a dialogue than maybe they currently do. So thank you for this invitation. I think the idea of a government speaker series is really great. So who am I and how did I get here? I guess for sins in a former life, I'm an economist by training. Please don't hold that against me, but my career started in the Federal Treasury in the mid-90s. A long time with Deutsche Bank as an economist, senior economist, foreign exchange strategist with a bank in New York during the GFC, and chief economist in Australia. Chief economist at the Business Council, a few New South Wales Government Board positions, and then took the role as the interim National Skills Commissioner to sort of design the National Skills Commission, and then was appointed formally last year, as Sassoon noted. I guess the way I think about the Skills Commission is this: it's about trying to bridge that gap between what does the labour market need and what's the education and training system supplying. Now, we don't run the education and training system, But I think it's about getting intelligence and information there that says these are the skills in demand, these are the skills that are growing, these are the occupations we think are likely to grow, and be really transparent and public about that. So one of the other things I'm really keen to do is push as much of our information out to the public domain. And also I think to create new and different types of information, so more detailed labour market data that maybe exists. I guess the mission is, in a way, by research and influence and publication and communication, align what it is the labour market needs with what the education training system is delivering. But then I think we probably need to think a little bit more laterally about how broad education and training is. It's not just those formal bits that government runs. There's a huge amount of education and training that occurs in the workplace too. And that, I think, is something that it's really important the folk on the government side don't forget it all. I'm a former economist, as you know, which means I can talk underwater. So Pip, I'm going to let you, feel free to stick your hand up when you want me to stop and bring it to a conclusion. Otherwise, I'll talk all day.
I think we'll make that work. That's good. We love a dynamic experience. I think the last year, if it's taught us anything, is that if you didn't have a digital business and digital skills, you don't really have a business. Suddenly, you couldn't do things the way you used to do things. Everything moves so swiftly online, and the future is only going to drive that further. I think the statistics are saying now by 2025 in Australia, we're going to need 156,000 new technology workers. That's a massive growth in that space. So when we look at it today, even 87% of the jobs that are getting posted require some form of digital skills. So for us, I see the gap, if we don't do something, only getting wider around how we have the skills to meet the jobs and the demands that are, in government and private sector and our not-for-profit sector. And it's going to take action, not just from government, but from business. It's going to be everybody having to lean into this. Can you share a little bit about what's being done and maybe what should be done that isn't being done?
Sure. Look, I think one of the really interesting things about the pandemic, to pick up on that point of yours, is and one of the intellectual challenges we have is to work out, is COVID going to radically change what our economy looks like and the way we do our jobs and the skills we need? Or has it really brought forward a whole bunch of things that were probably happening anyway, but have accelerated them massively? And are we looking at an acceleration type scenario? And my own personal view is we're probably in that second camp, that really what COVID's done is accelerated a lot of things we were probably already doing anyway, be it online shopping. And I bought my first book from Amazon 20 years ago. Last year was the first year I ever bought a dinner setting online, and remarkably, the plates turned up in one piece. But I think that point about digital skills being ubiquitous is really important. And we have a way that we convert an occupation to a set of skills using a thing called the Australian Skills Classification. And there's two things I'd say about the ubiquitous nature of digital skills. The first is that we have digital skills in there along with teamwork and communication as one of those 10 core competencies. Everybody needs a minimum level of digital literacy, call it what you will. I know different people have different languages around these things. And so that's the first part of that need. And then the second part is dealing with changing business models, so that acceleration. And then the third part is this underlying evolution in the economy toward a more digital-based economy. So if I think about future skills needs, I think you can wrap up a lot of them in what I call the 4 C's: computing, which is a catch-all for digital, care, communication, and the last one unfortunately escapes me right now. But if you think about sort of what demographics does to one part of the economy, so that's the care sector, the ubiquitous nature of digital skills is computing. Communication is really interesting because our own research finds that it's at a higher level something that's really quite difficult for computers and AI to replicate, and it's almost essential for every human interaction. And the last one, sorry, is cognitive, Pip, and that is thinking in a non-routine, creative way. Now, I think, how do we address this digital skills gap? And look, I think there are a few things. Firstly, we publish research on skill shortages. So this is then designed to help inform government policy around education and training, skilled migration and the like. But secondly, I think we need to make sure that the education and training system's up to date with the needs of employers, but that we get this balance between knowledge and skill right. And what I mean by that is it's almost impossible, I think, for an education and training system to preempt what the future IT landscape is going to look like. It was asking too much of my university to teach me about R and Python, which as an economist these days I probably need to know about, but I'm stuck with Excel because that's what I'm familiar with. But I think what's really important is to also get a sense of knowledge that if you can manage your way around one IT system, you've got that basis for managing your way around the next one. And then also thinking about attributes. And I don't know if you agree with this, but something that somebody said to me, particularly in the cybersecurity space, is it's not just a particular skill. You're after a person with a particular set of attributes that are able to dig and find and research. And then I think you end up thinking in a sort of multi-layered way about specific skills I might need to do a job, a broader set of knowledge, and then attributes. And it's quite, and then I think as an employer, trying to find that person that fits all of those three is quite difficult sometimes. So what we probably also need to do is communicate the sorts of careers that are out there to young people a lot better. That's what the National Careers Institute is set up to do. But also communicate the opportunities that are out there. And so that's something you can do by publishing your own research, which I know you're doing, but it's also something we can do, but by also highlighting that in the way we think about skills, the two fastest growing ones over the next 5 years are digital related, which of course won't surprise anyone in this room.
No, I agree with that. And it's interesting. I mean, I think as businesses, it's really important for us to be working with the tertiary sector and other parts of our ecosystem to help give input to the jobs of the future so that we can, start building those skills. But yes, you can come through and get some of those credentials, but there are other things that are not necessarily about the Python-like skills, but it's the creative thinking, it is the ability to do problem solving, the ability to collaborate and work with other people, so those are some of those attributes that certainly we look for beyond just what I'd call an experience. And more, I think as a business, we're thinking about how do we take and understand your capabilities and recognize that we can reskill you in certain areas because you've demonstrated the capability to learn that type of content. So there'll be, I think, a real sort of evolution, I think, around the role of businesses to think about reskilling too. So, but I think, government's also evolving, and you're talking, I believe, about a new workforce strategy. And I'd love to know about the government's new workforce strategy. What is it, you can share with us about it? And you touched on it before. Is there any part of that where you're thinking about big data and how you can leverage that to address, skill shortages or think differently? And a reminder for all our guests today, I'm asking some questions now. Please use the Q&A format to put your own questions in, and we'll weave those in as we go through. But yeah, I'd love to know a bit more about the workforce strategy.
I think I might have to leave the workforce strategy, Pip, if that's okay, only because it's not something that's sort of being driven by the National Skills Commission, and I wouldn't want to overstep. But what I do think is important is what we can contribute at the National Skills Commission to informing any workforce strategy, be it a workforce strategy by government, or indeed be it your own workforce strategy or a workforce strategy by an industry group or peak body. And you mentioned big data, and I think there's an interesting challenge for us at the National Skills Commission, which is finding that balance between forecasts and thinking about the future versus that balance of understanding what's happening in our labour market right now. And how do we best communicate the skills needs of the future, given, of course, the future is incredibly uncertain. And as somebody put it to me about 2 months ago, labour market forecasts can either be precisely wrong, i.e. I can try and tell you we'll need 5 plumbers in Bega in 6 years' time, or they can be generally right, i.e. I can tell you STEM skills are growing much more rapidly the non-STEM skills and the jobs of the future are more likely to require higher levels of education, bachelor's degrees or high-level vet qualifications. Now, that's going to be generally right, but I probably haven't given you enough specificity there to go and build a response to that. And so what we're trying to do is deal with this challenge in a few different ways. One is using big data to better understand what's happening in our labour market right now. So earlier, sometime in the last 8 weeks, and I was trying to think, was it earlier this month or earlier last month or earlier the month before, but sometime in the last 8 to 10 weeks, we've released something called youre. Acronym wasn't mine, but it's now casting of employment by region and occupation. So in English, what that means is we've taken 350 odd occupations and have attempted to create what the current employment trend for each of those occupations is in 88 different regions across Australia. Now, that gives you a sense of, in 88 different regions, which jobs are rising, which jobs are falling, where's the fastest growth. It's 31,000 different data points all up, or different data series all up, and it's data that's only previously been available in the census. So previously you had to wait every 5 years to get this level of detail on what's happening in a regional labour market. So we've used some big data techniques, machine learning environment, to create these estimates. And I think that's really interesting, because what we can then see is what's growing at any point in time. If we can then understand what's behind that, that's probably just as useful as creating a big economic forecasting model that tries to predict the number of plumbers or computer programmers or whatever in Vega in X year's time. The other thing that I think is really important is to think about transferable skills. And the analogy I use for this is, look, why should I teach a fitness instructor social media skills when they're doing a fitness instructor course? For two reasons. Firstly, our analysis of job advertisements using natural language techniques tells us that social media is a term that comes up more and more often for fitness instructors. And secondly, we know that social media skills are growing in importance across a range of different occupations. And so this is an example of something that you might think is a little bit peripheral to being a fitness instructor, but gives you a skill that is then transferable. And I think part of the way of addressing skills gaps in the future is to think about what are these transferable skills that we need to sprinkle across the education and training system more broadly. And obviously, digital skills are one of those. Again, I'm conscious that I'm doing that economist thing and talking underwater. But I think for us, there's an interesting intellectual challenge there between how much should we forecast, at what level of precision do we think is useful versus being too general. And then is thinking about transferable skills a way of dealing with some of those forecasting challenges?
I'm not going to lie, I think you've hit on a really, really good market opportunity, because my 20-year-old daughter, who's in year 3 at UTS, does the social for our personal trainer. So she's been doing social, and she's getting a discount on training for running a social. I'll have free training. She's doing that, but so the price as a parent is every time I tray, I have to have her taking photos of me that suddenly make their way onto his Instagram account. I'm like, can't you find a better picture than that one, please? It's not okay. So there's definitely something in that case study you shared. I'm getting a few questions coming in, but I just want to ask you one last question, because it's an area I'm really passionate about. It's the whole, how do we do reskilling? So I think if you're in the workforce, very few people really can take 3 years, go out and get a whole degree around that. So the whole focus on reskilling, micro-credentialing, I think is going to become more important. Shorter courses, soft skills that augment that. What do you think we need to be doing together with our learning ecosystems, TAFEs, universities, third-party learning? What is it we need to be doing across the industry and better to help create a better reskill micro-credential market? Or do you think actually that's not the path?
No, I think you're right, Pip. And if I use myself as an example, I don't need to spend 3 or 4 years. But I do probably need to learn R to keep up with my team. I'm the sort of person that likes to see the data and likes to play with the data myself. I'm told that At my level, I shouldn't be doing that anymore, but old dogs, new tricks. I'm never going to stop playing with the data myself. So I think you're right. It is, what's that little bit of knowledge, or that extra bit of knowledge, I should say, or that extra bit of skill that keeps you up to date in the workforce. And I think that's really important, because when we think about structural change in the economy and in our jobs, so often we think about occupations that are falling in employment or may not be with us in 5 or 10 years. But the real structural change in our jobs is what in the literature is called task change, i.e. the way in which you do your job subtly changes from year to year. And it doesn't matter if you're an economist or a government relations manager or a CEO. If you think about how you did your job 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, the job title's the same, but the skills you're using are different. The interactions are different. This is a perfect example of task change, what we're all doing today. We wouldn't have thought that we'd do an event like this online 3-4 years ago, and it wouldn't, if we did do it, it would have been a lot more clunky. So I think that's absolutely the response to the challenge. Now, there is a lot happening in that space. As part of the Job Trainer Initiative, the National Skills Commission, one of our roles is to actually approve qualifications and short courses on that list. And there are literally hundreds of, thousands of short courses or micro-credentials or part qualifications, call them what you will. I know the university sector's done the same in response to COVID. I think the challenge is, how do we then stack these or make them more recognised by industry as well as educational providers? So you need to know what it is when someone's applying for a job. You need to know what this qualification means, what it looks like, what skills somebody's got as a result of that. I think there's probably more work for both government and business to do in making sure we're actually speaking the same language. And when you get someone's CV that has a list of qualifications, you go, right, yep, we know what that is, we know what that looks like, we know the skills that person comes with. It's easy to do it with a university degree because you basically know what a 4-year degree in this from this university looks like. If there's hundreds and thousands of micro-credentials out there, it's harder to know what that looks like. Not saying that's a reason not to do it, just saying it creates, I guess, an information asymmetry that we need to collectively respond to.
I agree. But I think, to that point, I think there's so many opportunities. The term "don't waste a crisis" has never been used more than it has been, I think, in the last 18 months that I can remember. And I think, one of the questions from the audience, which I think speaks to don't waste a crisis, is how can we make sure, as we really invest in this skills agenda in this country, how can we make sure it's distributed more equally? And is there a way to think about how we accelerate pathways for remote and regional skills development and job creation? Because, in many ways, we're working from anywhere. There's the great relocation happening. What's the opportunity to think a little bit more about, regional Australia in this focus area?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think in a way that's also contingent upon us as employers as to how we think about these things. And I say us as employers, I employ not quite as many people as you, Pip, but the National Skills Commission's got about 140 people. And when we advertise for a vacancy, given we're hosted by the Department of Employment, Skills and Education that have offices all around the country, the test for me is, does this position only have to exist in Canberra, or can it exist elsewhere across the country? And I think, we have this opportunity to be a bit more flexible in how we think about working. Having said that, I think there is something about collaboration in the office that is important. Those chats at the water cooler, when we're allowed to do them again, are important. And I think it probably was only 2 or 3 years ago we were all talking about the agglomeration effects of cities, and why is it that economic activity continues to be, or at least had been, moving continually to cities over time. But I think what COVID has taught us is there are other ways of working. And indeed, potentially in the IT sector, the other way of working is to bring in people remotely from other countries, not necessarily physically. I've done some work over the past few months with we were peripherally involved in a consultancy that had, I think, people all scattered all through Europe. And because I was working from Sydney, it took me, maybe this says something about me, but it took me about 3 or 4 weeks to work out this person wasn't based in Australia. So I think there are those opportunities. I think it's a matter of not losing that important informal communication when you've got teams working remotely.
Yeah, and I think there's such great opportunities for us as businesses, as government, to really embrace a new way of work that has people being more remote, having different life choices. I think that can stimulate regional Australia with jobs where people couldn't maybe do these jobs in these locations for, and the art of the possible, and the companies that lean into that and embrace the skills required to do that, I think that can become a competitive advantage.
I think there was a part to that question I didn't answer, and that's about how we get sort of a more equality of access. And so one of the remits in front of us at the Skills Commission around vocational education and training is coming up with nationally consistent approaches to pricing. And one of the elements that's really important in that is recognising the different costs of training in regional areas, remote areas versus metropolitan areas. Now, that's a very technical response to the question, but I do think having that equality of access is really important.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The next question from one of our viewers is one I face into a lot. So I'm really keen to hear your perspectives on this. There seems to be a perception that when we talk about, getting digital skills and digital jobs, that it's like ICT jobs. You've got to be, in computing industry, but actually, when we look at job postings, it's across the board that digital skills are required for those jobs. Marketers aren't just creators and the creativity, they're the data scientists. You need this convergence of digital skills into almost every role, but the perception that digital skills is for those in technical type roles or ICT roles, I think is quite pervasive. What is it you think we need to do to sort of change the perception of digital skills in every, just a broader array of jobs versus just that technical field?
It's really interesting because it's one that strikes me as, how do I put it? We all engage, every Australian engages with some form of digital technology. Well, almost every Australian would engage with some form of digital technology every day. So I think there's probably a few elements to that. One is recognising that a base level of digital literacy is a component of every job. Then the other is, I think, recognising that digital technology is just part of the ongoing evolution of the economy and part of the ongoing evolution about the way we work. And I think that means recognising that if you're a retailer, digital technology isn't just about the website. It's how do I integrate digital technology in my bricks and mortar presence? How can I use that? So this is underway sort of regardless, full stop, right? So I think the question then is, what are the gaps? Are they large or small gaps? I think in many instances, they're probably small gaps. So then what's the appropriate training response to that? Because you're right. Yes, we can forecast, and we are, a big increase in employment in application software programmers over the next few years. But that's only part of the digital story. And so maybe coming back to your earlier point, Pip, it's about having the right micro-credentials in the market to address the digital skill gaps at those less intense levels.
Yeah. And the other question that's come through pre and live is really about the role of the tertiary sector. So we've talked a lot about sort of like there's some reskilling elements when you're already in the workplace. But one of the questions that come through is from a perception that potentially our tertiary sector is lagging behind teaching, the future workforce, the skills that employers really need, or, putting into, these degrees more padded type subjects that aren't, which is, aren't really as relevant anymore. Do you think the tertiary sector really needs a rethink in regard to how they create and invest in the skills of the future? What's happening in that sector you think that may need to change?
Look, the way I think about it is I I think there's probably change underway already now. You know, and if I think about the direction of sort of policy, job-ready graduates is a case in point. You know, so I think the other thing I'd say is the last 18 months have probably seen a lot more flexibility as far as micro-credentials or short courses from the tertiary sector as well. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that the tertiary sector is sort of sitting over there only doing 3 or 4 year degrees or masters. But the other thing I'd say is, as it becomes apparent that with a working life of, you know, I joined the workforce when I was in my early 20s. There's no medical reason why I couldn't be working probably until my 70s. You know, it's different for blue collar or manual jobs, of course, but that's half a century. It's not clear to me that the digital skills I learnt circa 1991, 92 and 93 are going to be relevant. So I suspect there'll just be an element of workforce change that the tertiary sector will then respond to.
Yeah, and I've been sitting on an advisory board for Attila at UTS, and I've been on it for the last 2 years. I'm just coming off it after filling my maximum time, but it's been fascinating to watch that sector really sort of lean into those changes. And you know, I think Attila is such a, you know, a progressive VC. He's been an incredible partner, and I think made a huge difference. So I can see the internal machinations and that change and that responsiveness. Another question we got is one I think is really important. I think, you know, we're in this incredible digital revolution, and we want this to pay a digital dividend, not create a digital divide. But we have seen with COVID that there are some inequities, you know, either through accessibility, or we saw high school attendance in certain lower socioeconomic demographics, you know, drop. You know, where people's access to technology or ability to get a, you know, a quiet space to, you know, do the work, you know, some communities have been, you know, disproportionately impacted through COVID. So what are your thoughts in regard to making sure we're targeting and helping with that skills and that knowledge gap in a part of the world where actually we may have seen some inequities, and how we, you know, turn that on its head to make sure that we're actually helping people the most who need to gather those skills, or maybe starting from, you know, further behind the starting line?
Yeah, look, I think that's something that's not just unique to the digital space. So that equality of opportunity around education is really very, very important. And, you know, this isn't necessarily coming to the question you posed, but, you know, why is it I'm so excited about investing a lot of time in the vocational education and training space? Because it's, in many ways, it's vocational education and training which is really very critical to giving people that equality of opportunity in the education and training space if they don't want to go to university, or they're much more technically minded. So there are probably 100 different policy aspects that question cuts across, and it's a question that isn't just relevant to digital skills or a digital divide. It's, I think, a much broader question. But from our perspective, or my perspective at the National Skills Commission, part of dealing with that is thinking about what are the additional support some students need to complete training. How do we appropriately capture that? What sort of fee concessions or advice around that is appropriate to make sure that everybody does get that access to training. Hopefully, one of the remarkable things that, you know, we've seen over the past 20 years now is that the cost of technology keeps dropping, although it doesn't seem that way when you buy it, because the ability of it keeps rising. So there's a very technical reason why the price of computers falls in the CPI, but it always seems to cost about $2,000 to buy the computer. But I think that perhaps there is an opportunity in the tech sector itself to think about what is it we can provide, or what is a product that's ubiquitous enough that everybody can use, that's available. And I think, you know, there's no reason why these things should be completely insurmountable, but they're really important, right? if you don't have access to a device or a laptop or an iPad or a smartphone, it's really difficult to even apply for a job. So these are really critical questions.
Oh, yeah, it sure is. I always try to reiterate to my kids what a place of privilege they come from. I was, I grew up in one of 5 kids. We didn't have a lot of money, and I'm always conscious of reminding them that as they think they want their latest iPhone or whatever. There's so many people who don't have access, and it's important we try and create equity in that system and give more to people who are actually starting from behind and find ways to help ensure that we can all have great education, great healthcare, and equal access to applying for roles and equal access to pay. So there's work to be done on that one for sure. I'm going to ask one last question on behalf of our listeners and today, and we're very committed at Salesforce to being lifelong learners. We have great reimbursement program for people who want to continue to do learning. What advice would you give people who are listening today, watching today, on where you think they should be spending their time, energy, places they should be exploring to build their own skills and experiences? What would you be encouraging this audience to do as we're thinking about investing in our own skills for the future?
I think one really important thing is to never forget what it is that you're personally passionate about. What is it that you're personally interested in? And so there is and this might sound a bit counterintuitive coming from an economist that's engaged in a lot of labour market forecasting and trying to match the demand and supply. But I think the most important piece of advice I'd give anyone is work out what it is you like doing, work out what it is you're passionate about, work out what it is that interests you. And I say this as somebody that started off at university doing an accounting degree, because that was at the time where a lot of advice was around. There was huge demand for accountants. Within a few years, you'll graduate, you'll be earning a very good salary. It took me about, 8 weeks to work out I didn't like accounting. I'd always really loved economics at high school and changed my major. And I think that was probably the best decision I made. So look, in all of this discussion around what skills are in demand in the future, what it is we need now, just don't forget to check in with yourself and ask, what is it I'm personally interested in, passionate about, and want to do?
No, I think that's true. It's about purpose leading you. When you're passionate about something, you continue to invest in that. And I too loved economics at school. I still remember my economics teacher, Vaughan Cronin. And those teachers, I think sometimes we underestimate the impact they make on helping ignite that passion. I think it's an incredible vocation to be a teacher at any level. I want to thank you for spending time with us today and sharing some of your insight and your perspective. I think it's incredible to actually hear your journey. I love that you started in accounting and flipped that. And I say that to my own kids, what you start learning is not what you necessarily end learning. And the sense of being a lifelong learner, I think, is going to be more important than ever, because the pace of skills and technology and the demand side is not going to slow down. It's only ever going to go faster. I think it was Bill Gates who said we overestimate what's going to happen in 5 years and underestimate what's going to happen in 10. And so we really need to actually be ahead of that. And I think the sort of questions you heard today from our listeners really were about that, about how do we make sure we try and get it right. And I thought your earlier comment about I can be specifically wrong or generally right is spot on, and we've got to take enough of that data and enough of that information to guide us forward, but not to lock us in, so to speak. So what you've shared has been amazing. I'm going to be handing back to Sassoon, who's going to sort of wrap us up, but certainly on behalf of myself and the team at Salesforce, a huge thank you. It's incredible to have somebody like you in the role that you're in, because that gives me great hope around the focus from a government perspective, and having a team that's really pushing and helping us think about that. It's a problem for all of us to solve. Skills and capacity is one of the things that keeps me up at night. Creating a great place to work for our people and making sure we can attract great skills into this industry to help government and customers and not-for-profit. That's my biggest concern right now about doing that. So I'm really passionate about this area. So thank you, and let me hand over to the fabulous Sassoon to sort of wrap us up.
Thank you, Pip.
Thank you, Pip. Thank you, Adam. Thank you to Pip for moderating this session. Pip is one of our, not only our CEO, but a moderator extraordinaire. Thank you, Pip. And Fiona and Gloria from our marketing partner team have also set up this session with us, partnering with our partners, Salesforce partners. And finally, thank you to Adam. I was reminded of the need for skills, digital skills, even for the setup of this webinar this morning. So that was a very early reminder for me. But I have to say, even in my working career, the use of different skills, whether it's emails, and I'm embarrassed to say even using fax machines for a long period of time and adopting to different requirements in my job function. At Salesforce, we talk about working from anywhere. And I think what the National Skills Commission is doing is going to help enable Salesforce and many other companies to have their employees virtually work from anywhere if they have the capability to do so. And, the Skills Commission is a very important part of the government's mission to identify and meet skill shortages. And it'll be very interesting to see how the Skills Commission also develops in a post-COVID environment, since it was born in COVID, but how it looked like also post-COVID. So on joining Pip and on behalf of Salesforce, Adam, thank you for joining us. It was a very enlightening discussion. The questions we received is a testimony to the interest we have in the business right across our business and our ecosystem about this topic. And thanks again for joining us and spending this time with us to talk about some of the things you're working on. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it. Thanks to Soon.
Bye-bye.